Here Come the Brides, the 1968 Western about loggers and the women shipped west to marry them, ran 2 seasons. Do you know that out of 8 cast members, one left stardom to ride in ambulances, another sleeps in a famous London cemetery? Their graves stretch from Michigan to England. We open this countdown with the man, a generation taped to its bedroom walls, though the most surprising thing about Bobby Sherman has nothing to do with music or television. At the peak of his fame, when his face sold out magazine print runs and his concerts drowned in screams, he walked away from the spotlight and trained to ride in the back of an ambulance. He learned to read a pulse, to start an airway, to keep a stranger alive until the hospital doors swung open. Sherman played Jeremy Bolt, the shy, stammering youngest Bolt brother whose bashful charm made him the show's heartthrob. That softness on screen was the engine of a phenomenon. Discovered singing at a Hollywood party, he became a fixture on the music series Shindig, and between 1969 and 1971, he stacked up 4 gold singles, including Little Woman and Julie, Do Ya Love Me? For a few short years, he rivaled David Cassidy and Donny Osmond as the face every teenage girl in America wanted on her wall. He was more than a poster, though, a self-taught musician who could play 16 different instruments and a working actor who turned up on series from The Partridge Family to Emergency and, much later, Frasier. A 1971 bid for his own sitcom, Getting Together, lasted a single season, and the spotlight that had felt permanent began to fade. Then, the charts cooled, a spin-off series failed against tough competition, and the screaming faded. Most stars in that position spend the rest of their lives chasing the high again. Sherman did the opposite. He became a certified emergency medical technician, joined the Los Angeles Police Department as a reserve officer in 1988 to teach first aid to recruits, and in 1999 became a reserve deputy sheriff in San Bernardino County, training new hires in the skills that save lives. Friends from his teen idol days, among them the actor John Stamos, would later call him a quiet hero who traded magazine covers for the back of an ambulance. His first marriage to Patty Carnell gave him 2 sons, Christopher and Tyler, before the couple divorced in 1979. In a strange knot that ties this cast together, Carnell later married another Bolt brother, his co-star David Soul. Sherman found lasting love with Brigitte Poublon, his partner for the last 29 years of his life, and together they built a children's foundation funding education and music for students in Ghana. The end came gently and far too soon. His stage 4 kidney cancer was made public in March of 2025, and on June 24th of that year, he died at his home in Los Angeles at the age of 81. During his final days, his wife read him fan letters from around the world while she held his hand. He was cremated and laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, in a quiet cremation garden called The Woodlands, in a niche shaped like a tree stump near a waterfall and a wooden footbridge. Jeremy Bolt was the boy too shy to finish a sentence. Bobby Sherman became the man who spent his second life keeping strangers breathing. The second story belongs to a man who started as the all-American boy and ended as a British subject, buried an ocean away from the country that made him a star. David Soul could have lived out his years in the California sun on Starsky and Hutch money. Instead, he moved to London, took British citizenship, and asked to be laid to rest there among poets and revolutionaries. Soul played Joshua Bolt, the steady middle Bolt brother, the grounded center between the eldest's bravado and the youngest's shyness. He arrived in television with one of the strangest auditions in the medium's history, appearing on The Merv Griffin Show as the covered man, singing with his entire face hidden, insisting he wanted to be judged for his art rather than his looks. The looks won anyway. By the mid-1970s, he was Detective Ken Hutchinson, half of the most famous crime-solving duo on American television, and in 1976 his recording of Don't Give Up on Us reached #1 in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. A second British #1 followed with Silver Lady, and for a stretch he was as much a pop star as an actor. When the American fame thinned, he rebuilt himself an ocean away on the London stage and screen, taking the title role in a notorious production of Jerry Springer, the opera, and turning up in Holby City, Little Britain, and an episode of Agatha Christie's Poirot. His personal life was crowded and often painful. Soul married 5 times and fathered 6 children, and one of those marriages was to Patty Carnell, the same woman who had been married to his bride's co-star Bobby Sherman. He spoke openly about his struggle with alcohol, and in 1989, at the urging of his then-wife, the actress Julia Nixon, he entered a rehabilitation program and began the long work of getting well. Years later, he met an English public relations officer named Helen Snell while working on a London stage production, called her his soulmate, married her in 2010, and credited her as the reason he became British. His daughter China grew up to be a singer in her own right, one of 6 children he left behind. The body that carried him through all of it finally gave out. A heavy smoker for most of his life, Soul was severely affected by chronic lung disease and had already lost a lung to cancer when he died in London on January 4, 2024, at the age of 80, surrounded by his family. His exact cause was never formally released, described by those who loved him only as a long and valiant fight. He was buried at Highgate Cemetery in North London, the storied Victorian graveyard where Karl Marx and the novelist George Eliot also lie. Joshua Bolt was the brother who kept everyone grounded on the American frontier. David Soul spent his last decades becoming an Englishman and now rests in London soil. Third on our list is a man who twice watched the biggest roles of his life slip through his hands, once because of his politics, and once because a producer simply changed his mind. Robert Brown was blacklisted during the Red Scare, red-listed as a suspected communist, and for a stretch of years he could not get hired at all. Then, when the work returned, he was cast as Detective Steve McGarrett on the original Hawaii Five-0 and was replaced by Jack Lord just 5 days before the pilot began filming. Brown played Jason Bolt, the charismatic, fast-talking eldest brother whose grand scheme to import 100 brides drives the series. His path to Seattle was an unlikely one. Born in New Jersey to an English father who worked as a butler for the family of Theodore Roosevelt, Brown served in the Navy and then studied under Lee Strasberg alongside future stars Rod Steiger, Harry Belafonte, and Walter Matthau. He reached Broadway in 1948 opposite the film star John Garfield, years before Hollywood ever called. A wonderful piece of Hollywood mischief followed him too. When he stepped in at the last minute on a 1967 episode of Star Trek, the producers quietly paid him $5 more than the show's star, William Shatner, a secret kept because Shatner's contract forbade anyone from earning more than he did. Love came and went and came again. His first marriage to Layla Gould gave him his daughter Lori. The longest bond of his life was with the artist Elise Pogowski Harris, whom he married in 1986 and stayed beside for 32 years, until her death in 2018 left him a widower in his 90s. He outlived almost everyone from that dark chapter of Hollywood history. After the brides sailed off into reruns, he starred in the short-lived sea adventure series Primus, stayed a close friend of Carol O'Connor, and eventually set acting aside for a quieter life behind a camera as a photographer. Robert Brown died at his home in Ojai, California, on September 19, 2022, at the remarkable age of 95, one of the last living witnesses to the blacklist. His family never disclosed a cause, and he slipped away quietly, far from the cameras he had walked away from decades earlier. He was laid to rest at Santa Barbara Cemetery, on the California coast. Jason Bolt was the confident leader who always got his way. Robert Brown spent his real life being denied the roles he had already won. The next name made more pictures for Warner Brothers than any actress of her era, and watched a gambling husband turn a fortune into nothing. Few performers on this list carry the old Hollywood weight of Joan Blondell, and few were treated as roughly by the men they married. At the height of her career, she handed her savings to her third husband, the showman Mike Todd, and watched him gamble it away and drag her through a humiliating public bankruptcy before he left her with 2 children and almost nothing. Blondell played Lottie Hatfield, the warm-hearted saloon keeper who takes the newly arrived brides under her wing. She had been performing almost since birth. Born into a traveling vaudeville family, she slept in a property trunk as an infant and stood on a stage at 4 months old. By her 20s, she had won the title of Miss Dallas, reached Broadway opposite a young James Cagney, and become the reliable engine of the Warner Brothers machine, turning out as many as 11 films a year through the Great Depression. Audiences first knew her from pictures like The Public Enemy and the Gold Diggers musicals, and a much later generation found her as the diner waitress Vi in Grease, released the year before she died. In 1951, her performance in The Blue Veil earned her an Academy Award nomination, and in 1972, she drew on her trunk-and-train childhood to publish a novel about vaudeville life. Her marriages told the story of her century. The cinematographer George Barnes gave her a son. Her second husband, the singer Dick Powell, gave her a daughter and a divorce, after which the actress June Allison married Powell and helped raise that child. Mike Todd gave her ruin, and later left the orbit of Hollywood entirely to marry Elizabeth Taylor. What came at the end carried a strange tenderness. Joan Blondell died of leukemia in Santa Monica on Christmas Day of 1979 at the age of 73, with her children and her sister Gloria gathered at her bedside. She was cremated, and her ashes were placed in a columbarium at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, a few miles from where another member of this cast would one day come to rest. Lottie Hatfield was the woman who took care of everyone else. Joan Blondell spent her real life rebuilding herself after the people closest to her took everything she had. If one of these stories has already stayed with you, tell me in the comments which cast member it was and why. I read the replies on this channel, and the people you remember are the reason these names get told at all. Of these 8, only one is still alive, and we reach him now. Bo Svenson was the towering, easygoing lumberjack of the show, the kind of supporting presence nobody expected to become a leading man, and yet he went on to a film career stranger and longer than almost anyone else on this list. The gentle giant of the Seattle logging camp became a club-swinging Tennessee sheriff and, much later, a favorite of Quentin Tarantino. Svenson played Olaf, the lumberjack everyone called Big Swede, a good-natured mountain of a man among the loggers. His beginnings were a world away from Seattle. Born in Sweden as the only child of a big band leader mother and a father who served as personal driver to the King of Sweden, Svenson emigrated to the United States alone at 17 and spent 6 years in the Marine Corps, discovering judo while stationed in Japan. Standing 6'5", he became a serious competitor in the sport, and that towering presence followed him into films like North Dallas 40 and a memorable turn as a Soviet agent on Magnum P.I. Acting started as a way to pay for his education and turned into a career when he was hired to replace Paul Newman as Robert Redford's co-star in The Great Waldo Pepper. The role that defined him came next. He took over the part of the real-life lawman Buford Pusser in the Walking Tall sequels after the original star died in a car crash, swinging a club against corruption in films that became cult favorites. Decades later, Tarantino gave him a small tribute role, making Svenson the only actor to appear in both the 1978 war film The Inglourious Basterds and its 2009 reimagining, with a stop in Kill Bill along the way. His private life has been steadier than his filmography. He married Lisa Svenson in 1966, raised 3 children, and became a grandfather, and he still runs his own production company well into his 80s. Away from the screen, he also wrote a novel, One More Pursuit in a Life That Never Slowed. As of the spring of 2026, Bo Svenson is 85 years old and remains the last surviving member of this cast, still working in the business that found him on a logging set in 1968. Big Swede was the quiet muscle in the background of the bride's story. Bo Svenson outlasted every co-star and turned a bit part into half a century on screen. Our 6th name survived something most of this cast never faced. Before Henry Beckman was a working actor, he was a teenager who lied about his age to join the Canadian military, and on June 6, 1944, he waded onto Juno Beach in the Normandy landings and lived through a day that killed most of the men around him. He carried that morning with him for the rest of his long life. Beckman played Captain Clancy, the gruff seafarer who ferried each new shipload of brides into the Seattle wilderness. War shaped him before the cameras ever did. Born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, he came home from Europe and ran a theater in New York before settling into Hollywood, where he spent nearly half a century as one of television's most dependable character actors. Audiences knew him as Colonel Harrigan on McHale's Navy, as a menace on Peyton Place, and decades later as Detective Briggs on The X-Files. His earliest fame had come as a commander in the 1950s Flash Gordon serial, and across the border his homeland twice handed him its highest film honor for his supporting work. His life away from the screen was full and a little unexpected. He founded a theater company in Cooperstown, New York, with his first wife, the actress Cheryl Maxwell, and he raised a son, Brian, who grew up to become an astrophysicist. Late in life, he even wrote a guide on getting independent films made, a quiet second pursuit as a producer and author. In his final years, he settled near the Mediterranean with his second wife, Hilary, choosing warmth and water for the close of his life. The end found him gazing at the sea. Henry Beckman died of heart failure in Barcelona, Spain, on June 17, 2008, at the age of 86, and by his family's account he passed while looking out at the ocean from his window. He was cremated and his ashes were placed in the family plot at St. Peter's Catholic Cemetery, near Sumas, Washington, close to the Canadian border of the country he had served as a boy. Captain Clancy was the old sailor who delivered hope across the water each week. Henry Beckman was a real soldier who stormed a beach at 18 and chose the sea for his final view. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing, because this channel exists to give names like these the careful telling they have earned. Our next name spent years buried under alien makeup, and he died on the very day his most famous character returned to movie screens. The seventh face belonged to an actor most viewers never quite recognized, because for much of his career he was hidden behind pointed ears and Vulcan eyebrows. Mark Lenard built a quiet, dignified body of work, and in a coincidence almost too neat to be real, he passed away on November 22, 1996, the same day a new Star Trek film opened across America. Lenard played Aaron Stemple, the sawmill owner and rival who held the loan threatening the Bolt brothers' mountain. His road there ran through a small Michigan town. Born in Chicago as Leonard Rosenson and raised in South Haven, where his father ran a resort on the shore of Lake Michigan, he trained as a paratrooper in the Army during the Second World War, before earning a master's degree and reaching Broadway. Science fiction made him a quiet legend. He first appeared in the universe as a Romulan commander, returned as Sarek, the father of Spock, across the original series and 3 feature films, and even voiced the role in animation. Within the franchise, he became one of its most respected figures, holding the rare distinction of having played a Vulcan, a Romulan, and a Klingon, and of being the first actor to speak the Klingon language on screen. The new film that opened the day he died was Star Trek: First Contact. His marriage was the steady center of his life. He married a woman named Anne in 1960 and stayed with her for 36 years, raising 2 daughters, Roberta and Catherine, and she outlived him by nearly 3 decades before her own death in 2025. The final year of his life was a hard one. Diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma, Lenard declined as the disease spread, and he died of organ failure at a Manhattan hospital at the age of 72. His body was carried back to the small lakeside town that raised him and buried at the Hebrew Cemetery in South Haven, Michigan. Aaron Stemple was the outsider, always circling the family at the center of the story. Mark Lenard spent his career playing outsiders from other worlds and came home to rest where his own began. We close our list with the brightest of the brides and with the quiet cruelty of how her story ended. Bridget Hanley played the most wholesome, hopeful young woman on the show, and in her final years, a disease slowly took the one thing an actress relies on most: her memory. She spent the close of her life at the motion picture country home, gently losing her hold on the past. Hanley played Candy Pruitt, the spirited unofficial leader of the brides and the love interest of Bobby Sherman's Jeremy. She was a local girl living a hometown dream. Raised in Edmonds, Washington, just north of Seattle, the daughter of an All-American football player and Marine, she graduated with honors from the University of Washington before signing with Screen Gems and fighting hard to win the lead in a show set in her own corner of the world. The set gave her more than a career. She fell in love with E.W. Swackamer, one of the show's directors, married him in 1969, and stayed married for 25 years, raising 2 daughters, until his death in 1994. Her devotion reached well beyond her family. Away from the brides, she found a new audience as the comic foil Wanda on the sitcom Harper Valley PTA, opposite Barbara Eden. And on stage, she performed 2 solo shows drawn from the poetry of James Dickey. Working with her sisters, Hanley led a years-long effort to save a historic log cabin in her hometown of Edmonds. moving it to safety and restoring it as a piece of living local history. The disease took its time, and then it took her. Bridget Hanley died on December 15, 2021, at the age of 80, from complications of Alzheimer's disease. She was cremated, and rather than a cemetery plot, her ashes were given to the family who loved her. So the place she rests now stays with them rather than on any public map. Candy Pruitt was the hopeful heart of a show about new beginnings. Bridget Hanley spent her real life honoring where she came from, even as the illness took her memory of it. 8 names, and the map they left behind. A London cemetery, a Michigan lakeshore, the Washington border, 2 California forest lawns, and 1 man still standing.